So here's the question that I guess everybody's asking: how is he so certain that it is? I mean, the Radziner Rebbe thought he found it 100 years before that. I know that, let's say, the Karaites, although we don't take their opinion into consideration, have been saying for a long time any blue will do. There are even some who say that within the Rambam's opinion, at least for regarding the priestly vestments, which I think were at least more important than, let's say, the regular tzitzit. The Mishnah says, I don't need the Tekhelet in order to do the actual mitzvah of tzitzit. White is good enough. But for the priestly vestments, it seems to be a critical component. Yet then you have a Rambam saying perhaps he says this, I don't think he says this, people say he says this, that any blue will do. So how do you know it has to be this? And how did he know that this really was it? Just because he was able to get blue out of a sea snail, isn't there other ways to get blue out of other creatures also?
Okay, so there are a lot of questions there. Yeah. I'll start with the last one. There aren't a lot of ways to get blue. When we named our book The Rarest Blue, that's because blue is extremely, extremely rare, not just on our planet, but in the universe. It's very, very difficult from a physics standpoint to make blue. In fact, the only dye naturally occurring that is produced by any life form that we know of that is blue, there's only one molecule, and that is indigo. And there's indigo is the main component of our Tekhelet, and indigo is the main component of the fraudulent Tekhelet, which was known even in the times of the Talmud, known as Kala Ilan. So and now let's get back to the first questions. How do we know, or how do we believe, why do we believe that this is true? So you have a convergence of many, many different things. And the Radziner Rebbe, and we can speak a lot about the Radziner Rebbe, we consider ourselves working in the same tradition that the Radziner Rebbe was. However, we're coming about this from a different position. We're coming about this using a lot more logic and science, if you will, and not trying to guess what might be the source of the Tekhelet only from the Talmudic sources. The Talmudic sources are extremely vague. Chilazon gufo domeh liyam. Its body is like the sea. What does that mean? What's its body? Does it mean its shell? Does it mean the body of the actual mollusk? What does like mean? Okay, so is green like blue? Is yellow like blue? So like is a problem. Sea. What color exactly is the sea? Are we talking about the sea? It's blue, it's green. The sea bed, that looks completely different. The water itself is clear. So everything about the one thing that the Talmud tells us about how we can find the chilazon is ambiguous. And maybe that's, maybe there's a point to what the Talmud is saying, and maybe it's not trying to give us an actual physical determination that we can go out then and find the sea creature, but it's trying to tell us other things, and there are many suggestions for what it's trying to tell us. But we have come about it from a completely different point. And there's a convergence of a number of things. Number one, we know that the chilazon, this animal source, we know that it lived in the Mediterranean. The Talmud tells us, Mi Sulamot Tzor V'Yad Haifa, along the northern coast of Israel. The Torah itself tells us that Tekhelet was found in Yechezkel. It tells us that Tekhelet was found in Elisha, which was Cyprus. It tells us that Tekhelet was being manufactured, and the expertise for Tekhelet was in Tzor, which is the Phoenician coast just north of Israel. Okay, so we know already that this exists in the Mediterranean. Well, so you can ask the question, what creatures exist in the Mediterranean that can give you a blue dye? And the answer is just our murex snails. There is nothing else, at least that we know about, or that anybody in the world or any scientist knows about. So that's one method of looking at it. The other is archaeological proof. And what we knew in 1991 was the tip of the iceberg for what we know now in 2021. There's been a number of discoveries. The early discoveries that Rabbi Herzog knew about were mounds of crushed murex snails. So he knew that this was used in the ancient time in a number of places for dyes, for making and manufacturing dyes. Now we know that there are at least 60 different places around the Mediterranean where you can find the remains of archaeological remains of dye houses that use these snails. So we know pretty much categorically that these snails were used. That's another piece of the puzzle. We know that this was something that was used in the ancient world and in the places where the Torah and the Talmud tell us that you could find the chilazon. Number 3, archaeological evidence that we have unearthed over the last 10 years or more. Fabrics that were dyed with murex snails, some of them purple, and we can talk about that in a little bit, and some of them blue, actually dyed blue fabrics, 2,000 years old, found here in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, in caves that Bar Kokhba's men were in, on the top of Masada, which where the Jewish zealots were, where Herod would have worn beautiful, beautiful royal clothes. And they are categorically, without any doubt, dyed with our little murex snails. And even linguistically, we know a little bit more about the ancient Semitic languages and even the modern Semitic languages. Chilazon, chilzuna. These are the terms that our snails are called by to this day in Persian or in Arabic or in Aramaic. And so, if you wanted to know what the chilazon was, you can also look towards those evidence. And last but not least, we're pretty sure from the way that the Torah and the Talmud speak about this, that these were not just clothes that beautiful fabrics that were precious to the Jews, but rather they were something that the entire ancient world considered beautiful and luxurious and fit for a king. Mordechai yatsa milifnei hamelech. We're almost there. Mordechai in ancient Persia walks out in beautiful royal garb, and we're talking about Tekhelet there. So from Africa to Persia to the Roman Empire, these were the most luxurious and beautiful garb of textile fabrics, and we're quite sure now that these snails were the ones that were used by the Romans and by the Persians. So all of that brings us to a consilience where it's very, very, very difficult to argue with the fact that the murex trunculus or the murex snails were the ancient source of Tekhelet. That doesn't mean, and here I'm going to shoot myself in the foot.
Okay, please.
It doesn't mean that from a halachic standpoint, you have to wear Tekhelet. That's a completely different question. But is this authentic Tekhelet that Rabbi Akiva would have been wearing and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, or Rabbi Yehuda himself, who used to make Tekhelet for his wife? That's a beautiful story. He used to tie Tekhelet for his wife. So was this the Tekhelet that they wore? I think that you can be quite sure that it was. It came from this snail, and it was probably something along the lines of this color.